You start walking away from conversations that cost your peace. You start choosing people who feel like home. And sometimes that means being alone. But alone, you discover, is not empty. It's spacious. It's where you finally hear yourself clearly. You redefine success. It's no longer about titles or followers or how many hours you can grind without breaking. Success becomes the moment you wake up without dread. The way you talk to yourself when no one else is listening. The ease in your shoulders when you're alone. The way your inner world begins to mirror your outer one. You realize that success isn't about climbing. It's about aligning. It's about building a life that feels honest, even if it doesn't look impressive. And that honesty, it becomes your new currency. You stop needing to be understood by everyone. You understand yourself. You stop explaining your choices to people who haven't lived your life. You stop shrinking your joy to fit into someone else's comfort. You stop apologizing for your boundaries, for your softness, for your silence. You let people misunderstand you, mislabel you, misjudge you, because now you know that your worth doesn't live in their perception. It lives in your truth. And your truth, it's unshakable. You begin to trust your own timing. You don't rush your healing. You don't force clarity. You stop comparing your path to anyone else's. You understand that your rhythm is sacred, that your unfolding is divine, that you are not behind, you're becoming. And becoming isn't linear. It's layered, it's messy, it's holy. You begin to honor your seasons, the blooming and the shedding, the momentum and the stillness. You stop fighting winter. You start trusting that spring will come. And it does. Not because you chased it, but because you allowed it. And so you rise, not with urgency, but with reverence, not with noise, but with truth. You rise with shaky hands and a steady heart, with tender hope and a quiet fire. You rise not to prove, but to belong, to yourself, to your life, to the sacred unfolding that has always, always been yours. There's a subtle shift that happens when you begin to reclaim the pieces of yourself you once discarded. It's not loud or dramatic, it's quiet, like the soft clink of keys when you open a door that's been locked for years. You find them one by one. The dreams you buried because someone said they were impractical, the quirks you toned down to be accepted, the questions you stopped asking because they made others uncomfortable. And now in this season of remembering, you pick each one up and whisper, "You still matter." You dust them off, hold them to your heart, and begin again, not from scratch, but from soul. You start to move through your days with more intention, not because you've mastered productivity, but because you've stopped letting urgency define your worth. You no longer rush through your mornings just to get to the next task. You pause, you breathe, you let the light touch your skin, you wrap your fingers around a warm mug and actually taste your coffee. You feel the water on your back in the shower like a blessing. These are not small things. These are the sacred. And you begin to understand that it's not about doing more. It's about being more present with what already is. Your conversations begin to change. You're no longer interested in surface-level exchanges or the noise of constant updates. You crave depth. You ask questions that make people pause. You listen with your whole body. You speak less, but say more. You notice the way people lean in when they feel seen, the way their eyes soften when you're fully present. And you give that presence not to be admired, but because you know what it feels like to be invisible. You've felt the ache of being heard, but not understood. And now your presence becomes a quiet balm for others. You also begin to notice your own inner dialogue, the way you speak to yourself when you make a mistake, when you're tired, when you fall short of your own expectations. You don't judge those voices. You recognize them. You name them. And slowly you replace them, not with toxic positivity, but with truth, with compassion, You stop telling yourself to push through when your soul is begging for rest. You stop calling yourself lazy when what you really need is care. You stop measuring your worth in completed checklists. You start measuring it in moments of alignment, of stillness, of honesty. You begin to forgive yourself, not in one sweeping gesture, but in layers. For the things you didn't know, for the times you stayed when you should have left, for the ways you silenced your own intuition. You look back at the younger versions of yourself, and you no longer roll your eyes or cringe. You reach out to them. You wrap them in compassion. You say, "You were surviving the best way you knew how. I see you. I honor you. And I promise to do better with what we've learned." That promise becomes a pact. There's a moment in life, often quiet and unnoticed by the world, where a person realizes they can no longer run from themselves. Not because something catastrophic has happened, not because they hit rock bottom, but because they've simply grown tired. Tired of pretending, tired of suppressing, tired of playing a role that never really fit. It sneaks in during the mundane, a walk through the street, washing dishes, sitting alone with a cup of coffee. And all at once, the weight of years spent hiding becomes too heavy to carry. That's when the unraveling begins. Not the kind that breaks you, but the kind that brings you home. You start to notice the ways you've been fragmented, how you've left parts of yourself in people who never truly saw you, in situations you outgrew but clung to out of fear, in dreams that were never really yours. You begin to understand that wholeness isn't about addition, it's about return, about coming back to yourself piece by piece and gently saying, "I remember you." And you don't always know where to start. You just know that the version of you that kept it all together is quietly stepping aside. And beneath that version is someone softer, someone truer, someone waiting. At first, the silence feels like a void. You're used to noise, the hum of obligations, the buzz of validation, the constant performance of being fine. But when you finally sit in the silence, when you stop filling it with distractions, something unexpected happens. You hear your own voice, not the voice shaped by other people's expectations, not the voice that says what's easy to hear, your real voice, the one that trembles when it speaks truth, the one that's been buried under layers of protection, and that voice doesn't demand attention, it just asks to be listened to. You begin to sit with your own discomfort, not to fix it or make it prettier, but to understand it. You notice how often your body tightens when you speak your truth, how your breath shortens when you set a boundary, how your heart races when you dare to want more. These sensations are not signs that something is wrong with you. They're evidence that you're stretching, growing, making space for the version of you that is finally ready to be seen. And yes, it's hard, it's scary, but it's real. And real, even when it's raw, is holy. You revisit moments you thought you'd moved on from, conversations that still echo in your mind, decisions that didn't sit right in your chest, times you betrayed yourself to keep someone else comfortable. And instead of pushing them away, you invite them in. You ask them what they're here to teach you. You hold space for the grief, the regret, the unmet longing. You let yourself feel it all, not because you enjoy the pain, but because you know that unprocessed pain becomes armor, and you're tired of being armored. You want to feel again, fully, deeply, freely. You begin to unravel the stories you've been told, that you're too much, that you're not enough, that your value is tied to your productivity, that rest is laziness, that love must be earned. You begin to question everything that ever made you shrink, everything that ever made you feel like you had to work harder just to be worthy. And in that questioning, you find freedom. Because what you uncover is a truth that doesn't shout, but holds you gently. You were never too much. You were never not enough. You were just misunderstood by a world that asks people to be small. You no longer seek healing as a destination. You stop trying to get to the other side. You understand now that healing is not a straight line or a box to check. It's a spiral, it's a return. Sometimes you revisit the same wound with new eyes, with a stronger heart, with more grace. And when that happens, you no longer say, I thought I was over this. You say, I'm meeting this part of me again, and this time I'll stay. You no longer run from your shadows. You sit with them. You light a candle in the dark and whisper, you're safe here now. You begin to treat your body as a sanctuary, not a project, not an ornament, a living, breathing home. You stop punishing it for how it looks and start thanking it for how it holds you. You nourish it with movement, with food, with rest, with touch, not out of shame, but out of reverence. You learn to listen when it speaks, when it aches, when it slows down. You understand now that your body remembers everything your mind tried to forget. And so you listen, you hold it, you let it teach you how to be present. You notice the shift in your relationships. The ones that once felt fulfilling begin to feel performative. The ones that allowed you to shrink become unbearable. You start craving depth over convenience, truth over harmony, presence over performance. And it's not that you don't love people anymore. It's that you've learned to love yourself enough to stop settling for half-hearted connections. A thread of continuity between who you were and who you're becoming. You begin to explore joy again, not as a reward, but as a right. You laugh more freely. You dance in the kitchen, even when the dishes are still dirty. You sing off key and don't apologize. You let the sun warm your face and call it medicine. You stop asking joy to prove its usefulness. You let it be the reason. You let it be enough. You understand now that joy doesn't have to wait until everything is figured out. Joy is allowed in the middle of healing, in the middle of grief, in the middle of the messy becoming. You no longer fear solitude. In fact, you seek it. Not because you're isolating, but because you finally made peace with your own presence. You don't need the noise to feel alive. You don't need the crowd to feel loved. You go for long walks with no destination. You write letters you never send. You sit in silence and realize it's not empty. It's full of everything you've been too busy to hear. You come to cherish the way your own breath sounds when the world goes quiet. It becomes a reminder. You are here. You are alive. You are enough. You begin to notice how healing isn't just internal. It's relational. You start showing up differently in your connections. You don't people please to avoid conflict. You don't shrink to keep the peace. You no longer twist yourself into a version that someone else will like more. You choose honesty over harmony. You allow others to see you in your entirety, not just the curated parts. And when someone can hold all of you, your joy, your pain, your questions, your silence, you hold them back, not out of need, but out of recognition. Because real sees real. And once you've felt that, you no longer settle for half-hearted love. You redefine what it means to be strong. You used to think it meant being unshakable, being unbothered, never needing help. But now you see strength in softness, in saying, I'm not okay, and letting someone in crying without explaining, in resting without guilt, in loving without guarantees. You see strength in the way you continue to show up, not because life is easy, but because your heart is resilient. Your strength is no longer tied to how much you can endure. It's tied to how true you can be. You start to walk away from roles that no longer serve you. The caretaker, the overachiever, the peacemaker, the fixer. Not because those parts were wrong, but because they were incomplete. They were strategies you learned to stay safe, to feel valuable. But you don't need to earn love anymore. You don't need to hold the world together to be worthy of rest. You can let go. You can be held. You can trust that who you are beneath the roles is still lovable. More than that, she's free. You begin to see your past not as a weight, but as a teacher. You stop trying to change what happened. You start asking, what did it awaken in me? You see now that every heartbreak showed you what your heart is capable of. Every loss created space for new becoming. Every silence taught you the value of your voice. You stop asking why it happened to you and start asking what it gave to you. And even if you never fully understand it, you choose to alchemize it, to make it sacred, to make it matter. You begin to let go of the need for closure. You understand now that some chapters don't end with clarity. Some people leave without explanation. Some apologies never come. And rather than holding your healing hostage to someone else's growth, you choose to release it. You give yourself the closure. You write the ending. You say, I let you go, not because you asked for it, but because I deserve peace. And in that letting go, you reclaim your power. You step back into your life, lighter, softer, more whole. And so, without knowing exactly when it happened, you realize that the person you've become is not just surviving anymore. She's living, not in the way that's flashy or perfect, but in the way that's real, in the way that's present, in the way that finally feels like home. There's a certain beauty in the way your life begins to slow down, not because things are suddenly easier, not because you've figured it all out, but because you've stopped running. You've stopped running from your own emotions, your own longings, your own shadows. You're no longer trying to outrun the parts of yourself you used to shame. Now you pause, you turn around, you kneel beside them. You say, you can come with me. And somehow, in that simple act of inclusion, you feel a sense of peace you've never known before. You realize that the parts of you that once made you feel like an outsider are actually your greatest strengths. The way you feel everything deeply, the way you sense energy before words are even spoken, the way you care too much, dream too wildly, speak too honestly. These are not flaws. These are gifts, sacred ones. And you stop trying to tone them down. You stop apologizing for your depth. You start honoring it because your soul has never been interested in shallow things. It came here for the real, the raw, the beautiful truth of being fully human. You begin to trust your intuition again. That soft voice that doesn't shout but nudges. The one you used to ignore, override doubt. Now you understand that intuition isn't a mystery, it's a memory, a remembering, a knowing that lives in your bones, your blood, your breath. And the more you listen, the louder it becomes. The more you follow it, the more aligned your life feels. You stop asking others for permission to make choices that only your heart can understand. You stop explaining your peace, you just live it. You notice how much time you used to spend editing yourself in conversation, the way you change your tone, your words, your opinions, just to keep things smooth. But now you value honesty over harmony. You don't force discomfort, but you don't avoid it either. You allow your truth to rise without softening its edges to make it easier for others to swallow. Because you know now that your truth doesn't need to be palatable, it just needs to be yours. And the people who are meant for you, they'll respect it. Even if they don't always agree, especially then. You start to recognize the difference between solitude and isolation. Solitude becomes a sacred container, a place where your thoughts can stretch out, where your heart can speak freely, where your spirit can rest. You no longer fear being alone because you've built a relationship with yourself that feels steady, nourishing, whole. You don't need constant noise to feel real. You don't need constant approval to feel worthy. You've found your anchor and it lives within. You begin to forgive others, not because they've asked, not because they've changed, but because you're ready to be free. You're tired of carrying the weight of resentment. You're tired of replaying the same pain on loop. Forgiveness doesn't mean it was okay. It means you're choosing peace. It means you're no longer letting what hurt keep you tethered to the past. You release, not for them, but for you, because your future deserves space to breathe, and holding on too tightly only blocks the light from getting in. You start treating your time like a sacred currency. You stop saying yes when your soul is screaming no. You no longer attend things out of obligation. You don't keep people in your life out of guilt. You understand that every moment you spend is a moment you'll never get back, so you spend them wisely, with people who light you up, in places that feed your spirit, on things that bring you closer to who you really are. And when you spend your time well, you begin to feel rich in a way money could never make you. You become more discerning about the energy you allow into your space. You don't entertain gossip. You don't engage in drama. You don't absorb other people's projections. You stop letting your boundaries be porous just to keep the peace, because you've learned that protecting your peace is an act of self-respect. You don't have to be accessible to everyone. You don't have to explain why your energy is sacred. You just live it. And in doing so, you teach others how to treat you without ever saying a word. You start to notice the rituals in your everyday. The way you make your bed in the morning becomes a prayer for order. The way you light a candle at night becomes a symbol of hope. The way you move through your day, with presence, with care, with softness, becomes a meditation. You don't need a fancy retreat to feel spiritual. You find the divine in the details, in the breath, in the pause, in the way you return to yourself again and again, even when the world tries to pull you away. You begin to see yourself in new light, not as a project to be fixed, but as a soul to be witnessed. You stop chasing transformation as if who you are right now isn't worthy. You start loving yourself in the in-between spaces, when things aren't clear, when healing isn't linear, when your heart still aches but your eyes see beauty anyway. You stop needing to be healed to be lovable. You understand now, healing and wholeness can coexist, and you are both. You look back on the moments that broke you, and you don't feel anger anymore. You feel awe at how you survived, at how you kept going, at how, even when everything around you was crumbling, there was a light inside you that refused to go out. You hold that version of yourself with reverence. You don't try to erase them, you honor them. They were the foundation, the soil, the storm that cleared the way. And now you grow, you bloom, you become, and in becoming, you no longer seek to arrive. You no longer strive for a final version of yourself. You understand that you are infinite, that you will unfold in layers for the rest of your life, that there is no final form, only deeper truths, softer edges, stronger roots. And that realization, it gives you permission to relax, to breathe, to trust the pace of your own unfolding. You stop waiting for life to be perfect to begin enjoying it. You laugh even when your heart is still healing. You celebrate even when things are uncertain. You rest even when the world tells you to keep grinding. You don't need a milestone to make a memory. You don't need a finish line to feel free. You live now, fully, freely, honestly. Because this moment, this ordinary, sacred, imperfect moment, is enough. You no longer perform your healing. You don't need to prove how evolved you are. You don't wear your growth like a badge. You live it, quietly, authentically, deeply. You stop correcting others just to be right. You stop projecting wisdom you haven't embodied. You let yourself be a student. You let yourself be unsure. You let yourself be human. And in that humility, you find something far more powerful than perfection. You find truth. And that truth, it anchors you. There's a moment when you stop needing life to make sense in order for it to be beautiful. You stop waiting for everything to line up before you let yourself breathe. You stop chasing closure like it's the key to peace. You realize that peace is something you create within, not something you find in the validation of the past. And so you put down the questions that will never be answered. You stop digging for explanations that no longer serve you. Instead, you begin to live in the open, in the ambiguity, in the grace of not knowing and still choosing to love anyway. You begin to view yourself not through the lens of achievement, but through the eyes of compassion. You stop measuring your worth in output and begin to feel your value in simply being. You let yourself exist without always doing. You allow stillness to be enough. And it's in that stillness that you hear the truth of who you are, beneath the roles, beneath the expectations, beneath the layers of performance. You hear your soul whispering, and for the first time you listen without judgment. You respond with presence. You start showing up for yourself in ways no one else ever did. You give yourself the words you long to hear. You create the safety you never felt. You offer yourself the patience, the nurturing, the understanding that you once looked for in the arms of others. And you realize, this isn't loneliness. This is liberation. This is what it feels like to finally belong to yourself. You stop chasing people who make you feel like you're too much. You stop pleading for space in places that never honored your presence. You reclaim your seat at your own table. You stop living in the shadows of your own story. You step out. You stand in your truth, not with defiance, but with quiet certainty. You don't need to scream to be heard. Your presence speaks. Your integrity speaks. The way you walk away from what no longer serves you speaks. You no longer need to convince anyone of your worth. You simply live it. You embody it. And that embodiment becomes your power. You learn to hold grief like a companion rather than an enemy. You no longer try to suppress it or rush it or fix it. You sit with it. You let it teach you. You let it show you the depth of your love, the tenderness of your humanity. You cry without apology. You feel without shame. You understand now that grief is not something to move past, but something to move with. And in those quiet moments of aching, you also discover unexpected beauty, a softness, a clarity, a deeper appreciation for what still remains. You let yourself be cracked open by the simplest things, a song, a sunset, the way someone says your name like it matters. You no longer guard your heart with walls made of cynicism. You let it feel, even when it hurts. You let it hope, even when it's scared. Because you've realized that vulnerability is not weakness. It's the doorway to everything real. And you are done with pretending, done with numbness, done with half-living. You choose feeling. You choose depth. You choose love, even when it's messy. You find freedom in the ordinary, in the quiet rituals of your day, in the way you make your tea, in the way you arrange your space, in the way you water your plants or fold your clothes or sit in silence before sleep. These small acts become sacred. They remind you that life is not just about the big moments, it's about the way you meet yourself in the mundane, the way you infuse presence into the ordinary, the way you choose to live with intention even when no one is watching. You release the fantasy that healing means becoming a version of yourself who never struggles. You accept that the journey will always include some pain, some doubt, some fear. But those things no longer define you. They visit, but they don't stay. They knock, but they don't enter without your permission. You learn to witness them without letting them run the show. You learn to soothe them without letting them silence your truth. You become the guardian of your own inner world. And that guardianship, it's gentle, it's sacred, it's steady. You begin to trust yourself to hold both joy and sorrow in the same breath. You stop waiting for the perfect moment to be happy. You allow happiness to sneak in, even when you're still grieving, still growing, still figuring things out. You laugh through your tears. You find comfort in paradox. You don't need everything to be resolved in order to feel gratitude. You don't need the pain to disappear to feel peace. You let life be layered, and you live inside the layers. You discover that boundaries are not walls, they're bridges. They don't separate you from others. They connect you more deeply with yourself. They help you love without losing yourself, give without depletion, care without resentment. You stop feeling guilty for saying no. You stop justifying your limits. You honor your capacity, and in doing so, you give others permission to honor theirs. Your boundaries become an act of love, not just for you, but for everyone involved. You begin to see the divine in the details, in the way the trees move, in the way your dog looks at you with unfiltered love, in the way your breath steadies when you put your hand on your heart. You no longer need a temple to feel spiritual. Your life becomes your sanctuary. Your breath becomes your prayer. Your body becomes your altar. And everything, every moment, every interaction, every choice becomes part of your devotion to living fully. You stop needing to be understood by everyone. You understand yourself, and that's enough. You don't shrink your truth to make others comfortable. You don't compromise your values for approval. You live aligned. You speak clearly. You rest often. You protect your peace. And when someone doesn't understand, you let them go with love. Because peace is more important than being liked, and truth is more important than fitting in. You let go of the idea that your worth is tied to your pain. You are not more lovable because you suffered. You are not more valuable because you carried everything alone. You stop glorifying the struggle. You begin to let ease in, joy in, support in. You stop proving and start receiving. You stop earning and start allowing. And it feels strange at first, but also liberating, because this too is healing, the unlearning of struggle as your identity. You begin to fall in love with your life again. Not because it's perfect, not because it's all figured out, but because it's yours, because you're here, because you're awake to it. You see beauty where you used to see burden. You find light in places that once felt dark. You don't need a different life. You just need a deeper presence. And that presence, it changes everything. There is something profoundly sacred in learning how to sit with yourself without needing to be distracted. At first, it feels unfamiliar, almost unsettling. The silence echoes louder than anything you've known, and the urge to reach for a screen, a task, a conversation is strong. But the more you resist that pull and remain seated with your own breath, something shifts. You start to hear the quiet voice underneath the noise, the voice that isn't trying to impress or entertain or persuade, the voice that only wants to be heard. And once you hear it, you can't unhear it. It becomes the compass you've been looking for all along. You begin to create space in your life, not just physical space, but emotional, energetic space. You declutter your calendar. You let go of commitments that were never yours to carry. You stop over-explaining yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You no longer chase conversations that leave you empty. Instead, you start to protect your inner world like sacred ground. Not everyone gets access. Not everything deserves a response. You begin to understand that stillness isn't laziness. It's preparation. It's alignment. It's strength in its softest form. You start honoring your emotions as messengers, not intruders. You no longer try to suppress sadness with forced positivity or silence your anger with shame. You sit with each feeling like it's a guest at your table. You ask, "What are you here to show me?" And sometimes it's hard. Sometimes the grief has layers you didn't know existed. Sometimes the fear tells you stories that sound so convincing, you almost believe them. But you stay anyway. You don't abandon yourself when it gets uncomfortable. You stay and you listen. And through that listening, you begin to reclaim every piece of you that was once labeled too much. You recognize how often you've dimmed your light to keep others comfortable. How many times you softened your voice, withheld your truth, or made yourself smaller just to avoid tension. But now you're learning to expand without apology. You're not loud or aggressive. You're grounded, rooted, steady. You let your presence take up space without asking for permission. You speak your truth without expecting consensus. You understand now that self-expression isn't about volume, it's about honesty. And your honesty no longer feels like a risk, it feels like a return. You begin to rewrite your story, not the facts, but the meaning. You stop seeing your past as a series of mistakes. You start viewing it as a journey of remembering, a trail of breadcrumbs leading you back to yourself. The things you thought broke you, they shaped you. The love that left, it cleared space for something real. The silence you endured, it taught you how to hear your own voice. You no longer resent the path, you honor it, even the parts you wish were different. Because all of it, every misstep, every ache, every detour, brought you here. You start celebrating the small things again. The quiet mornings when you wake up rested, the way your favorite song makes your shoulders soften, the feeling of clean sheets, the smell of coffee, the way your body feels when it's moving just to move, not to perform. You realize joy doesn't always arrive in grand gestures. Sometimes it slips in through the ordinary. Sometimes it hides in moments so subtle, they're easy to miss. But you don't miss them anymore. You're watching, you're awake, and because of that, your life becomes rich in ways that can't be measured. You redefine what it means to be productive. You no longer equate busyness with value. You know now that rest is essential, that creativity needs space, that healing can't be rushed. You give yourself permission to pause, to do nothing and call it something. You stop punishing yourself for needing breaks. You stop measuring your worth in how much you can endure. Instead, you measure your life in how often you come back to yourself, how deeply you honor your needs, how gently you hold your heart. You become more discerning about the energy you absorb. You don't linger in rooms where your spirit feels heavy. You don't make homes out of places that drain you. You walk away from conversations that leave you questioning your value. And when you can't physically leave, you set energetic boundaries. You visualize your own light and let it shield you. You reclaim your space internally and externally. You understand that being a compassionate person doesn't mean you have to carry what isn't yours. You can be kind and clear, loving and firm, open and protected. You stop rushing your transformation. You understand now that blooming isn't always graceful. Sometimes it's messy. Sometimes it's painful. Sometimes it's not visible to the outside world. But that doesn't make it any less real. You give yourself time. You trust the process. You allow yourself to grow at your own pace. And when you stumble, and you will, you don't make it mean something is wrong with you. You just begin again, and again, and again. Because every time you do, you're building something more solid than perfection. You're building trust. You begin to witness yourself through eyes of compassion. You notice the way you keep showing up, even when you're tired, the way you keep loving, even after being hurt, the way you keep choosing growth, even when it's uncomfortable, and you no longer take that resilience for granted. You acknowledge it. You thank yourself. You whisper, "You're doing better than you think." And slowly, that whisper becomes your new inner voice, the one that believes in you even on your hardest days. You create more space for joy without guilt. You stop apologizing for your happiness. You stop hiding your light around people who are still living in their shadows. You celebrate your wins, big and small. You let yourself be proud, not arrogant, not boastful, just deeply, sincerely proud. Because joy doesn't need justification. It's allowed to exist alongside your pain. It's allowed to be loud even when the world is quiet. And when you let joy have space, you invite others to do the same. You begin to live more from love than fear. Not because fear disappears, but because you stop letting it drive. You hear its voice, but you don't obey it. You acknowledge its presence, but you don't make it your compass. Love becomes your new guide. Not romantic love, not fleeting infatuation, but the kind of love that roots you, the kind that reminds you of your wholeness, the kind that says, "I trust you," even when you're uncertain. That love, it changes everything. You realize you don't have to earn rest, that you don't have to hustle for peace, that you don't need to prove you're worthy of softness. You simply are. And in this space, this quiet, grounded, sacred space, you finally feel what you've been chasing for years. Not in someone else's approval, not in achievement, but here, in yourself, in your breath, in your presence. There's something almost sacred in the way you begin to show up for yourself when no one is watching. You no longer need the eyes of others to validate your efforts. You rise in the morning not because you have to prove anything, but because you found something worth waking up for, your own presence. You brush your teeth like an act of devotion. You drink water as if your body is something holy. You speak to yourself with the kind of gentleness you once saved for others. And this slow unraveling into care becomes your quiet revolution. You stop fighting your emotions like enemies. You start seeing them as travelers passing through, each with something to share. Anxiety doesn't become a battle, it becomes a signal. Sadness isn't something to drown, it's a wave asking to be felt. You give yourself permission to be more than one thing at a time. You can be healing and hurting, grieving and growing, still in process and still enough. You stop judging yourself by how quickly you move through the hard stuff. You just breathe through it. You stay with it. And in staying, you heal in places you didn't even know were still bleeding. You begin to feel your body as something more than a project, more than a collection of measurements and mirrors and expectations. You place your hand over your heart and thank it for never leaving you. You let your shoulders drop. You feel your feet grounded to the floor, like roots finally remembering what they're meant to do: hold, support, belong. You stretch not to sculpt, but to awaken. You move not to earn love, but because you love. And every day you stop punishing yourself for taking up space. You start honoring the miracle of simply existing. You catch yourself offering words to others that you yourself need to hear. And instead of saving your softness only for them, you start turning it inward. You say to yourself what you would say to your best friend. You don't have to get it all right. You don't have to be everything to everyone. You don't have to carry it alone. You become your own safe space. You become your own soft landing. And in doing so, you begin to untangle the idea that love must be earned. You start to believe that maybe, just maybe, love is something you are allowed to receive, starting with yourself. You begin to notice how the way you talk to yourself shapes your world. How one compassionate thought can soften an entire day. How one breath taken with intention can bring you back to center. You stop catastrophizing every unknown. You stop assuming that struggle is always waiting around the corner. You let go of the future like a clenched fist finally opening. You stop living in defense of a pain that hasn't happened yet. Instead, you arrive. You exhale. You allow this moment to be enough. You realize that not every chapter needs to be dramatic to be important. There's value in the slow days, the quiet routines, the moments that might not make for exciting stories, but are building your life one breath at a time. You find meaning in the small choices, the way you feed yourself with love, the way you put your phone down to be present with someone you care about, the way you pause before responding so you don't speak from your wound. These tiny acts are not insignificant, they are sacred. They are the architecture of a life lived consciously. You begin to forgive yourself for staying too long in places that hurt you. You understand now that it wasn't weakness, it was hope. It was the part of you that believed love could fix what it didn't break, that loyalty could heal what only truth could touch. And though you wouldn't go back, you no longer shame yourself for who you were then. You honor her. She was doing her best. She was trying to survive. And now you're choosing something else. Not because you hate the past, but because you've learned from it. And that learning, that deep cellular wisdom, is the gift you carry forward. You stop trying to be understood by those who never truly listen. You no longer explain your depth to people who only ever swam in shallow waters. You speak your truth with clarity and peace, not defensiveness. And when it's not received with care, you don't internalize it. You don't twist yourself into something smaller. You simply walk away. Not with bitterness, but with grace. Because you finally know your worth. Not in a loud, prideful way, but in a quiet, unwavering way that cannot be shaken by someone else's refusal to see it. You notice how your energy shifts when you move from survival to presence, when you stop bracing for the next heartbreak, when you stop expecting abandonment around every corner. You begin to trust your own rootedness. You realize that you don't have to be on high alert all the time. You don't have to protect your softness by pretending to be hard. You let the armor fall, and in its place you find something far more powerful: awareness, peace, intuition.